Judge okays class action against Bombardier smuggling ring where migrants are moved from Canada to the U.S. on freight trains has been discovered. 126 young people have died from toxic drugs between 2019 and 2023. The mass slaughter of chickens in the U.S. due to bird flu. Georgia's parliament overwhelmingly rejects their president's veto, and Holland is about to get a new prime minister. Good morning. It's Wednesday, May 29th. I'm Nora, coming to you from a room in the sky in North York, Ontario. Here are your headlines. We start this morning in Quebec, where a class action has been authorized against Bombardier by a judge. The lawsuit claims that Bombardier lied about its finances in 2018. Okay, the Canadian press doesn't use the words lie, but they instead say that Alain Bellemare, who was the CEO, and CFO John DeBert didn't make, quote, timely disclosures of key facts around the company's financial forecast, unquote. The class includes anyone who bought stock in Bombardier between August 2nd and November 8th, 2018. In the financial update before the third quarter, the leadership of Bombardier said that they were on track to meet financial projections. Except by November, the company was in trouble. They cut 5,000 jobs and their stock fell by 23%. The Canadian press reports that Bombardier has, quote, reinvented itself as a pure-play business jet manufacturer, unquote, as if that's supposed to mean anything to us plebes reading the Canadian press. Next, a bizarre story out of British Columbia where dozens of people were smuggled out of that province via freight trains and into the United States. 2 people have been arrested related to the plot. CTV News' Todd Coyne reports that as the train crossed the Peach Arch border, border agents noticed quote-unquote anomalies when they x-rayed the cars. Those anomalies were 28 Mexicans and 1 Colombian who had been, quote, concealed inside a load of bulk plastic pellets, unquote. It happened again just over a month later when they found another 13 Mexicans in a freight train. Jesus Ortiz Plata and Juan Pablo Cuellar Medina, both who are American, were arrested on charges related to smuggling. Migrants would enter Canada, get themselves to Vancouver, and then be smuggled into the U.S. via freight train, something that U.S. authorities remind people is very dangerous. U.S. authorities have been, quote-unquote, tracking Ortiz Plata since 2022. Strange that it took an X-ray to discover so many people being smuggled to finally get them to do something about him. We'll stay in BC for devastating news about the toxic drug crisis. Between 2019 and 2023, 126 young people in that province alone died from toxic drugs, according to a new report. The leading cause of unnatural death for youth older than 5 years old is now toxic drugs. 83% of the deaths were related to fentanyl. Of the children who died, 2/3 of them were receiving or had received services from the Ministry of Child and Family Development. 60% of the youth were 17 or 18 years old, and most were girls. The Canadian press contrasts that to adults, where 80% of the people who die from toxic drugs are men. Next to the United States and the nightmare that is factory farming. More than 4 million chickens have been killed due to an outbreak of bird flu. The chickens were located at a quote-unquote large egg farm. No kidding. The farm is located in Sioux County, Iowa. Last week, almost 1.4 million chickens were killed near Minneapolis. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says that since the bird flu pathogen has been found, almost 93 million birds have been killed. So far, 2 farm workers and 1 man whose job was to slaughter infected birds have been diagnosed with bird flu. And that, folks, is basically what got me off eating meat that isn't grown on a farm that's tiny. Next to Georgia, where that country's parliament has overruled the presidential veto of the legislation that tries to limit foreign-funded activity in that country. The legislature is controlled by the Georgian Dream Party, which has passed the legislation. President Salome Zurabichvili vetoed the legislation, arguing that it would limit media freedom and make it difficult for Georgia to join the European Union. She said that the legislation is, quote, hindering the path toward becoming a full member of the free and democratic world, unquote. Not sure if Zora Bichvili has noticed what's been going on in the free and democratic world lately. Not sure you really want to join that right now. Anyway, either Zora Bichvili now signs the draft legislation or Parliament's Speaker can do it in 5 days. Once the legislation is in effect, any media, NGO, or other nonprofit needs to register with the government if more than 20% of their funding comes from overseas. The veto was rejected by a vote of 84-4. Protests have been happening for months by people who want to see the legislation ditched. The protests have been some of the largest that Georgia has seen in decades. Russia passed a similar piece of legislation, and many people are pointing to that as evidence that the country's legislature is too close to Russia. The EU argues that the bill would be considered a trade barrier. And for some reason, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that the U.S. would impose travel sanctions on Georgian officials who are, quote, responsible or complicit in undermining democracy in Georgia, unquote. Hold up. Pause. The legislature voted for this bill and the veto failed by 84-4. That's your best argument, Blinken, that this is undemocratic? Okay. Last gasps of an empire. I mean, gasp on. And finally, let's see if I get through this one without laughing. The Netherlands has a potential new prime minister. There are 4 parties forming a right-wing cabinet right now, and they are asking a guy who's never been elected, has no experience in government or in parliament, to be their prime minister. Oh, and his name is Dick Schoofed. Dick Schoofed was an intelligence officer, former head of the Dutch Immigration Service, and headed up an anti-terrorism agency. Geert Wilders ruled himself out for prime minister, and so Schoofed was sought out to lead the new parliament. The hope from these proto-fascists is that with Schoofed, Holland will have the strictest and most racist migrant policies of anywhere in the EU. Those are your headlines for Wednesday, May 29th. I'm Nora. I just want to take a second to talk about how amazing it was to be at the U of T Gaza Solidarity encampment yesterday. I had the opportunity to stop by. I'm going to go again today if I can. It'll be in the afternoon. And it is such a beautiful space. On the organization side, things are organized, they're clean, they're together, it looks great, people are happy, people are helping, there's food, there's laughter, there's community, there's collective sadness and mourning. It's a really, really beautiful initiative. And it's amazing, considering the state that the student movement is in, that these students have managed to pull this together. The folks that I talk to are all students. I spent the day talking to students, and shout out to all of you that I spent yesterday with, and also to the people who I talked to who are not students, who are visiting the camp or who were providing different kinds of support. It was really, really, really wonderful. And if you do have the chance to go by, I strongly encourage it. The shows of solidarity and community building, they're so important right now, because watching what's going on in Gaza, when you do that in isolation by yourself, you're left to despair. This is a way that you can look at the same sets of circumstances, the same facts, and find a way to not just despair, to find other people and to share with them that collective despair, which when you do that with other people turns into something else. I also want to shout out the folks keeping the sacred fire for their work and warmth. I mean, literal warmth and I mean, figurative warmth as well. And I encourage folks that to go and spend some time at the sacred fire if you do get to campus. I can't gush enough about what I saw yesterday, and it really left me for the first time in a long time feeling like, oh my God, they're doing it. The students are doing it. It's amazing. You are listening to this podcast at sandyandnora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.